I cried in a stairwell at midnight because my brother was dying. I had $200 due by morning, no way to get it, and 6 weeks before his heart gave out completely. I didn't know anyone was listening. I definitely didn't know the man who controlled this entire city. When I looked up, he was standing above me in a black coat, watching like my breakdown was something he'd been expecting. And when the most dangerous man I'd ever heard of asked, "Who hurt you?" I realized crying that night might save my brother's life, or end mine. The stairwell stank of old cigarettes and rotting garbage. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, clutching my phone with trembling fingers. The screen showed 3 missed calls from the hospital. My brother's medication was due yesterday. The pharmacy wouldn't release it without payment. $200 I didn't have. I slid down to sit on the filthy steps, pulling my knees to my chest. The building around me was silent. Everyone here knew how to mind their business. Nobody helped. Nobody asked questions. That was how you survived in this neighborhood. My throat burned. I was so tired. 3 months of working double shifts at the diner, sleeping 4 hours a night, skipping meals so my brother could eat. The doctor said he had maybe 6 weeks without the new medication. 6 weeks before his heart gave out completely. A sob escaped before I could stop it. Then another. I buried my face in my arms, trying to muffle the sound, but my body was done obeying orders. The cry tore out of me, raw and desperate, echoing up the empty stairwell. Nobody would hear. Nobody ever did. I was wrong. Footsteps stopped on the landing above me. Not the shuffle of a neighbor. These were deliberate, purposeful. The kind of steps that belonged to someone who never hurried because nobody made them wait. I jerked my head up, swiping at my wet face. A man stood 3 steps above, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't read. He wore an expensive black coat, perfectly tailored. His dark hair was swept back. His face looked like it had been carved from stone. Behind him, 2 more men appeared. Both wore suits. Both had the kind of build that came from hitting people, not gyms. My stomach dropped. I knew who moved through this neighborhood with private security. Everyone knew. We just never looked directly at them. Antonio Salvatore. The name was whispered in bars and back rooms. The man who controlled everything from the docks to downtown. The reason, half the cops looked the other way and the other half took early retirement. "Please," I heard myself whisper. I wasn't doing anything wrong. He didn't move. His gray eyes stayed locked on my face, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Who hurt you?" His voice was quieter than I expected. Almost gentle. I blinked, confused. "What?" "Oh, you." He said each word separately, like maybe I hadn't understood the first time. "Nobody hurt me. I'm fine." I started to stand, but my legs shook too hard. I grabbed the railing to steady myself. He took a step down. I pressed harder against the wall. One of his guards moved forward, but Antonio raised a hand and the man stopped instantly. "You're crying in a stairwell at midnight," Antonio said. "That's not fine. It's none of your business." The words came out sharper than I meant. "Stupid. You didn't talk back to men like him." But he just tilted his head slightly. "Why were you screaming?" "I wasn't screaming. I was just..." My voice cracked. "I was just tired." He studied my face for another long moment. Then he looked at one of his guards. "Check the building. See if anyone else is here. Anyone who might have caused trouble." The guard nodded and disappeared down the stairs. My heart was hammered. "Really, I'm okay. You don't need to. You're lying." I stared at him. He stared back. Neither of us moved. "My brother needs medication," I finally said. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "I can't afford it. That's all. Nobody hurt me. I needed a minute." Something flickered across his face. Just for a second. Then it was gone. "What medication?" "Heart medication." He's 15. He was born with a defect. The new treatment costs $200 every 2 weeks, And insurance won't. I stopped. Why was I telling him this? It doesn't matter. I'll figure it out. You'll figure out $200 by tomorrow. I had no answer for that. The guard returned. Building's clear, boss. Nobody else around. Antonio kept his eyes on me. What's your name? Every instinct screamed not to answer. Giving him my name meant he could find me. Remember me. But refusing felt more dangerous. Jade, I whispered. Jade Morrison. He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat. I flinched, but he only pulled out a phone. He typed something quickly and put it away. Go home, Jade Morrison. Your brother's medication will be at the pharmacy in the morning. Paid in full. My mouth fell open. What? No, I can't. You can. You will. He turned to leave, then paused. And next time you need to cry, do it somewhere safer than a public stairwell. He walked away. His guards followed. I stood frozen, not understanding what had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the lumpy couch in our tiny apartment, staring at nothing, replaying the encounter over and over. Antonio Salvatore had stopped for me, had listened to me, had offered to pay for medication he had no reason to care about. Didn't make sense. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had been some kind of fever dream. But when I called the pharmacy at 8, the pharmacist said my brother's prescription had been paid in full. Not just this month's dose. 6 months of medication. $1,200. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice barely working. No mistake, Miss Morrison. Payment came through at midnight. Cash transfer. Everything's ready for pickup. I hung up and stared at my phone. Then I remembered the way Antonio had looked at me in the stairwell. Not with pity. Not with hunger. With something else. Recognition. Like he'd seen my face before. Like he'd heard my cry before. Impossible. I'd never met him in my life. But the medication was real. The payment was real. And somehow, I knew this wasn't kindness. This was something else entirely. Something that had started long before last night. I just didn't know what yet. 3 days later, a black car pulled up outside the diner during my shift. I was carrying a pot of coffee when I saw it through the window. My hand started shaking so badly I had to set the pot down. The same guard from the stairwell got out. He walked into the diner, looked straight at me and said, Miss Morrison, please come with me. Every customer went silent. My manager froze behind the register. I'm working, I said stupidly. Not anymore. He wasn't rude about it. Just stating a fact. Why? What did I do? Nothing. Mr. Salvatore wants to ensure your safety. There's been a situation. My stomach twisted. What kind of situation? The kind that requires relocation. We need to leave now. I looked at my manager. She nodded quickly, not meeting my eyes. Smart woman. You didn't argue with Antonio Salvatore's people. My brother. Already picked up from school. He's safe. Cold washed over me. They'd taken my brother. Without asking. Without warning. I wanted to scream, but the guard's expression told me screaming wouldn't help. Where are you taking us? Somewhere protected. I untied my apron with numb fingers. I had no choice. They already had my brother. The car drove for 20 minutes. Not downtown. Not to any neighborhood I recognized. We pulled through iron gates into a property that looked like it belonged in a different city. A different world. The house, no mansion, sat behind perfectly trimmed hedges. White stone. Tall windows. A fountain in the circular driveway. My brother waited on the front steps, surrounded by 2 more guards. When he saw me, he ran over. Jade, what's happening? These men said we had to come here. They said you'd explain. I pulled him close. It's okay. We're safe. Safe from what? I didn't have an answer. The guard who'd brought me cleared his throat. Miss Morrison, Mr. Salvatore will see you shortly. Your brother will be shown to your quarters. Our quarters, I repeated. You'll be staying here temporarily. For your protection. Protection from what? I asked again, louder this time. Information was flagged regarding your proximity to a recent investigation. Individuals connected to that investigation may view you as a potential witness. Mr. Salvatore takes the safety of innocent parties seriously. The words sounded rehearsed, professional. But underneath I heard the truth. We'd been seen, noticed, marked. And Antonio Salvatore had been watching long before I cried in that stairwell. The room they gave us was bigger than our entire apartment. Thick carpet. A bed with actual pillows, not the flat ones from the thrift store. A bathroom with hot water that worked instantly. My brother loved it immediately. Hated it. "This is amazing," he said, bouncing on the bed. "Look, Jade, there's a TV. A huge one." I stood by the window, looking down at the gardens. Guards patrolled the perimeter. More stood at the gates. Beautiful prison bars. "We can't stay here," I said quietly. "Why not?" "It's way better than home." Because nothing was free. Because men like Antonio Salvatore didn't help people without expecting something back. Because every surface in this room probably had a camera. But I couldn't say any of that to a 15-year-old who'd just been given the first nice thing in his life. A knock interrupted us. A woman in her 50s entered, wearing a simple gray dress. She smiled warmly. "Miss Morrison, I'm Helena. I manage the household. If you need anything, just ask. Dinner is at 7. Mr. Salvatore requests your presence." But what if I'm not hungry? Helena's smile didn't waver. "Then you'll sit and keep him company." Dinner was served in a dining room with a table that could seat 20. Antonio sat at the head. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sat. A plate appeared in front of me. Chicken, vegetables, bread that smelled like heaven. My stomach growled, betraying me. "Eat," Antonio said. Not an order, just a statement. Picked up my fork. "Why are we here?" I explained. "Your safety was compromised." "Compromised how?" "You were seen speaking to a police officer 3 weeks ago. Outside the grocery store. A routine conversation, but the wrong people noticed." I tried to remember. 3 weeks ago. The cop who'd asked if I was okay because I looked tired. I'd said I was fine. We talked for maybe 2 minutes. "That's it. That's why you kidnapped us." "I didn't kidnap you. I relocated you. Without asking." "Would you have come if I'd asked?" Had no answer. He took a sip of water. "The people who noticed that conversation work for someone I'm currently in conflict with. They make assumptions. They connect dots that don't exist. You became a dot. So fix it. Tell them I'm nobody." I did. "They don't believe me." "Why not?" He looked at me then. Really looked at me. "Because I paid for your brother's medication. Because I stopped for you in a stairwell. Because I noticed you at all. You're telling me we're in danger because you helped us?" My voice came out sharper than I meant. "Yes. Then maybe you shouldn't have helped." Something flickered in his expression. "Perhaps." I pushed my plate away. "How long do we have to stay?" "Until the situation resolves." "How long is that?" "I don't know." Understood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This isn't protection. This is imprisonment. Imprisonment keeps you alive. I'd rather be free. Then you'd be dead within a week." His voice stayed calm. Factual. Like he was discussing the weather. I wanted to scream. To throw something. But the guards outside the door reminded me that anger wouldn't help. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. Nobody helps for nothing." He stood too, facing me across the table. "I stopped in that stairwell because your cry sounded exactly like someone else's. Someone I failed to help years ago. Someone who died because I didn't listen. I won't make that mistake twice." The words hung between us. Heavy. True. I believed him. I didn't trust him. But I believed him. The next morning I met his daughter. She was 7 years old. Dark curly hair. Gray eyes like her father's. She sat in the garden, completely silent, playing with a doll that she didn't actually play with. just moved it from hand to hand. That's Lucia, Helena said softly beside me. Mr. Salvatore's daughter. She doesn't speak. Why not? She was in the car when her mother was killed. 2 years ago. She saw everything. Hasn't said a word since. My chest tightened. I knew that kind of silence. The kind that protected you from remembering. From feeling. I walked closer. Lucia looked up at me with those solemn gray eyes. Watching. Waiting. I sat down on the grass near her. Not too close. Just within reach. Hi, I said quietly. I'm Jade. She didn't respond. Didn't smile. Just kept moving the doll from hand to hand. I didn't push. I just sat there watching the garden, letting her get used to my presence. After 5 minutes, she scooted an inch closer. After 10 minutes, she held out the doll. I took it carefully, examined it, then handed it back. She almost smiled. Almost. Over the next week, I spent an hour each morning with Lucia. I didn't try to make her talk. I just sat with her. Sometimes we drew pictures. Sometimes we watched birds. Sometimes we just existed in the same space. She started sitting closer. Then touching my arm when she wanted attention. Then leaning against me while I read aloud from picture books Helena provided. Antonio watched from the windows sometimes. I could feel his eyes on us. But he never interrupted. On the 8th day, Lucia fell asleep with her head on my lap. I sat very still, not wanting to wake her, and thought about my own mother. How she used to let me fall asleep on her lap. How safe that had felt. I understood now why Antonio had stopped in the stairwell. Not because I reminded him of someone he'd failed. Because Lucia reminded him. My cry had sounded like hers must have. Desperate. Unheard. And he'd sworn never to ignore that sound again. She likes you, Antonio said that evening. We were in his study. He'd requested, commanded, my presence after dinner. She's a good kid, I said. She hasn't shown affection to anyone since her mother died. Helena tries. The therapists try. But Lucia. He paused. She's locked inside herself. I know what that feels like. He looked at me. Do you? I hesitated. Then I decided the truth couldn't hurt worse than this situation already did. When I was 8, my mom left. Just walked out one day and never came back. My dad started drinking. By the time I was 10, I learned that crying made things worse. That being quiet kept me safe. So I stopped making noise. Until the stairwell. Until the stairwell. Silence filled the space between us. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy with understanding. My wife's name was Gabriella, he said quietly. She was killed as a message to me. A message that I was vulnerable. That I cared about something other than power. Lucia was in the back seat. She watched her mother die and couldn't do anything to stop it. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked down at his hands. I've given her everything. Safety, therapy, anything she needs. But I can't give her what she actually wants. I can't bring her mother back. I can't unhear her screaming for help while I was miles away. I understood then. He hadn't saved me in the stairwell. He'd saved Lucia. Or tried to. 2 weeks into our stay, Helena brought me tea in the garden where I sat with Lucia. The older woman settled onto the bench beside me while Lucia played with chalk on the paving stones. Mr. Salvatore asked me to tell you something, Helena said. About why he recognized you. I set down my cup. I'm listening. 4 years ago, there was a fire in the building next to yours. A woman lived there with her 2 children. Everyone evacuated except her. She was trapped on the 4th floor. Something cold moved through my chest. I remembered that fire. Remembered the smoke. The sirens. You went back in, Helena continued. The firefighters were still setting up their equipment. Nobody else moved. But you ran back inside. You climbed the stairs through the smoke. You found that woman and helped her to a window where the ladder could reach her. The kids, I whispered. She kept screaming about her kids. They were already out. Safe with neighbors. But she didn't know. You went back in for her anyway. I'd forgotten. Or buried it. The burns on my arms had taken weeks to heal. The nightmares of being trapped in smoke had lasted longer. Mr. Salvatore owns that building, Helena said. The woman you saved worked for his organization. She was important to him. Like family. When he reviewed the security footage later, he saw what you did. He's been quietly making sure you stayed safe ever since. The medication. The job recommendations I'd gotten. The time my rent was mysteriously paid when I came up short. He's been watching me for 4 years. He's been protecting you for 4 years. There's a difference. That night I confronted him. I walked into his study without knocking. The guards at the door didn't stop me. You've been manipulating my life, I said. No greeting. No pretense. Antonio looked up from his papers. Yes. Why didn't you just tell me? Because you would have refused help. Because you're stubborn and proud and you prefer suffering alone to accepting anything that feels like charity. He wasn't wrong. I hated that he wasn't wrong. The woman in the fire, I said. Who was she? My cousin. She raised me after my parents died. She's the closest thing to a mother I have. And you've been, what? Repaying a debt. Ensuring that the person who saved her life didn't end up dead in a gutter because she was too stubborn to ask for help. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be angry. But exhaustion won. I didn't save her for a reward. I know. That's why you deserved one. I don't want to be your project. You're not. He stood walking around the desk to face me. You're someone who heard a cry for help and answered it without thinking about the cost. That's rare. That matters. And whether you like it or not, I will not let you die because the world is full of people who don't answer when others scream. The attack came 3 weeks after we'd arrived. I was reading to Lucia in her room when the alarms went off. Sharp, piercing. The kind of sound that meant everything had gone wrong. Antonio burst through the door, 2 guards behind him. Basement. Now. What's happening? Rival organization. They're hitting the house. Gunfire erupted somewhere outside. Close. Too close. Lucia's eyes went wide with terror. She started shaking, silent screaming written all over her face. I grabbed her, pulling her against my chest. It's okay. We're okay. Antonio led us down a hidden staircase behind a bookshelf. The basement was reinforced concrete. Safe room. My brother was already there with Helena and 2 more guards. Stay here, Antonio ordered. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Where are you going? To end this. He left. The heavy door sealed behind him. Lucia trembled in my arms. My brother looked terrified. And all I could think about was the sound of gunfire getting louder. Tell me a story, my brother whispered. Like Mom used to. So I did. I made up a story about a princess in a tower and a dragon who protected her and a kingdom that learned to be safe. My voice shook, but I kept going. Lucia pressed closer. Listening. Holding on. The shooting stopped after 30 minutes. Or maybe it was 3 hours. Time didn't work right in that concrete room. When the door finally opened, Antonio stood there. Blood on his shirt. Not his blood, I realized. He wasn't injured. Just covered in someone else's violence. It's over, he said flatly. Lucia saw the blood. Started shaking harder. I turned her face into my shoulder. How many? I asked quietly. 5. All eliminated. Eliminated. Not killed. Not murdered. Eliminated. Like they were problems to be solved instead of human beings. My stomach turned. You killed 5 people. I killed 5 people who came to kill us. Yes. In front of your daughter's home. Something cracked in his expression. Just for a moment. They chose this location. Not me. Helena ushered us upstairs. Away from Antonio. Away from the aftermath. But I couldn't stop seeing the blood on his shirt. Couldn't stop thinking about 5 families who'd lost someone tonight. Even if those ones had come here to hurt us. I found him on the back terrace an hour later. He changed clothes, washed the blood away. But I could still see it in my mind. Does it ever bother you? Yes. He didn't turn around. Does what bother me? Killing people. Every time. The honesty surprised me. I'd expected denial. Or cold acceptance. Then why do you do it? Because the alternative is letting them kill the people I'm responsible for protecting. My daughter. My household. You. I'm not your responsibility. You became my responsibility the moment you saved someone I love. I moved closer. Your daughter saw that blood tonight. She saw you walk in covered in violence. How is that protecting her? He finally turned. His face was exhausted. Older than I'd ever seen it. It's not. But it's the best I can do. I can't undo what I am, Jade. I can only try to aim it in a direction that causes the least harm. 5 people are dead. 5 people who would have killed a 7-year-old child to make a point to me. I don't mourn them. You should. Why? So I can be a better man. He laughed bitterly. I'm not a good man. I've never pretended to be. But I'm a man who keeps the people in this house alive. That's the only morality I can afford. Lucia stopped coming to the garden after that night. She stayed in her room. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep. When Helena tried to help Lucia through things. When Antonio approached, she hid under her bed. But when I knocked on her door, she opened it. I sat on the floor beside her. She curled into a ball, staring at nothing. Trapped back in the place where her mother died. Where blood and violence were all she could see. You're safe, I whispered. I promise you're safe. She shook her head. Safe wasn't possible. Not in this house. Not in this life. Your dad made a choice tonight, I said quietly. A hard choice. He stopped bad people from hurting you. That doesn't make violence good. But it doesn't make him a monster either. She looked at me with those gray eyes full of questions she couldn't ask. Sometimes, I continued, the people who protect us have to do scary things. That doesn't mean we're not allowed to be scared. Or sad. Or angry. But it also doesn't mean they don't love us. I thought about my own father. How he'd tried to protect us in his broken way. How he'd failed because his methods were wrong, not because he didn't care. Lucia reached out and took my hand. Still silent. Still scared. But holding on. I went to Antonio that night. He was in his study, staring at papers he wasn't reading. Your daughter needs you, I said. She's terrified of me. She's terrified of what you represent. There's a difference. He looked up. Is there? Yes, because what you represent is the violence in this world. But who you are is her father. And she needs her father more than she needs to be protected from reality. I covered myself in blood in her home. You kept her alive. That matters more. Does it? I moved closer. 4 years ago, I ran into a burning building because someone's children might be trapped. I didn't think. I just heard the screaming and I moved. You do the same thing. You just use different tools. Bullets aren't a rescue. Sometimes they are. You told me yourself. Those men would have killed a 7-year-old to hurt you. You stopped them. That's rescue, Antonio. It's just the kind that leaves blood behind. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she won't even look at me. Because you haven't explained. You haven't talked to her about what happened or why. You just cleaned up and expected her to understand. She's 7. She doesn't understand. She just knows people died and you were covered in their blood. What am I supposed to say? The truth. That you're scared too. That you wish the world was different. But that you'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. Even when it costs you pieces of yourself. The next morning, Antonio sat down on the floor outside Lucia's room. Not trying to go in. Just sitting there. Present. I watched from down the hall. He stayed there for an hour. 2 hours. 3. Finally the door opened. Lucia peeked out. Saw her father on the floor. Waited. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just let her see him vulnerable. Waiting for her. She took one step out. Then another. Then she was sitting beside him, not touching but close. "I'm sorry you saw that," Antonio said quietly. "I'm sorry this is your life. I'm sorry I can't be someone different. Someone safer." Lucia leaned her head against his shoulder. It was the first affection she'd shown him since her mother died. He wrapped an arm around her carefully like she might break, and they sat there together, father and daughter, both trying to survive in a world that demanded blood as payment for safety. I turned away, giving them privacy. Whatever happened next wasn't about me. But I felt something shift in my chest. Understanding maybe. Or acceptance. Antonio Salvatore wasn't a good man. But he was trying to be a good father. In the only way this brutal world allowed. "You're free to leave," Antonio told me a week later. "The threat has been neutralized. Your apartment is still available. Your brother's medication will continue to be covered. You have no obligations here." I stood in his study, processing the words. Free. Could go home. Back to my life. Except I didn't want to. What about Lucia? Yes. What about her? She needs stability. Consistency. Someone who doesn't carry a gun. I know. That's why I have Helena. Helena's wonderful. But she's staff. Lucia needs someone who chooses to stay. Not someone who's paid to care. Antonio studied me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if the position is available, I'd like to stay. Not as a prisoner. Not as someone you're protecting. As someone who works here. Who helps with Lucia." "Why?" "Because she heard me. When I was crying in that stairwell. When I thought nobody in the world gave a damn if I lived or died, someone stopped. Someone listened. That saved me. Now I want to do the same for her." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I can't pay you what you deserve. Pay me enough to cover rent and my brother's medication. That's all I need." Done. Just like that, my life changed direction. From victim to chosen family. From rescued to rescuer. 3 months later, Lucia spoke her first word since her mother died. We were in the garden. She was drawing with chalk. I was reading nearby. She tugged on my sleeve. I looked up. "Stay," she whispered. So quiet I almost missed it. My throat closed up. I pulled her into a hug. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Antonio watched from his office window. I saw him press a hand to the glass. Saw his shoulders shake once. Then he turned away, but not before I caught the shine in his eyes. Lucia had spoken. After 2 years of silence. After therapy and time and every careful attempt to reach her. She'd spoken because she finally felt safe enough to make noise. To be heard. To believe that crying out wouldn't cost her everything. That night Antonio knocked on my door. When I answered, he just looked at me for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For teaching my daughter that it's safe to cry. That someone will hear. That being vulnerable doesn't mean being destroyed." "I didn't teach her that." "You did. You stopped in a stairwell for a stranger because you couldn't bear to let another cry go unheard. She learned from watching you. The world outside didn't stop being dangerous. Antonio's enemies didn't disappear. Violence still happened. Blood still stained floors that had to be cleaned. But inside this house something had changed." Lucia laughed now. "My brother thrived with proper medication and stability. I had a place that felt like home, even though it was built on a foundation of controlled violence. I didn't approve of everything Antonio did. We argued about his methods, his choices, the bodies that disappeared in the night. But I understood now that morality wasn't simple. That good people sometimes did terrible things to protect the vulnerable. That hearing a cry for help meant accepting responsibility for whatever came after. One night, standing on the terrace while Antonio smoked a rare cigarette, I asked him, "Do you regret stopping for me that night?" He looked at me. "Never. Even though I complicate your life, question your decisions, make you think about things you'd rather not think about. Especially because of that." He exhaled smoke into the dark. "You remind me that there's more to strength than violence. That listening matters. That the people we protect are worth protecting because they're good, not because they're useful. I'm not that good. You ran into a burning building for a stranger. You stayed in this house for a traumatized child. You cry when you're overwhelmed instead of burying it until it explodes. That's good enough. Legend has it that Antonio Salvatore changed after that night in the stairwell. That he became fractionally less brutal, marginally more careful about collateral damage. That he started asking whether violence was necessary instead of just assuming it was. I don't know if that's true. From inside this house, he still looked the same. Still made hard choices. Still came home with blood on his hands sometimes. But Lucia was speaking now. Full sentences. Laughter. She'd asked for a puppy last week, and Antonio had said yes without hesitation. My brother was thriving, planning for college, talking about becoming a doctor. And I had learned that safety wasn't about avoiding danger. It was about knowing that when you cried out in the dark, someone would stop. Someone would listen. Someone would choose to hear you, even when ignoring you would be easier. The legend of the Mafia boss who heard the cry wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about a bad man becoming good. It was about a broken man learning that listening was a form of strength. That protecting the vulnerable meant more than just eliminating threats. It meant creating space where people felt safe enough to make noise. Cry. To be heard. And in a world as brutal as ours, that was its own kind of miracle. Even if it came wrapped in violence and blood and choices that kept me awake some nights. I stayed because the alternative, a world where cries went unheard, was worse. Antonio stayed because walking away would mean abandoning the people who'd learned to trust him. We were both trapped. But at least we were trapped together. Listening to each other. Hearing what the world tried to silence. That had to count for something.